Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for joining us today. I'm Takinia, the Grants Director for the Arts and Humanities Council, and I am here with my fabulous staff, Jesus and Crystal. And you have joined the Programming and Capacity Building Project Grants webinar. So here's how this is going to play out. I'm going to go through all of the slides and then make time for questions at the end of the presentation. But if you have questions while I'm speaking, feel free to utilize the chat box. Just keep in mind that I won't be able to answer those questions until the end of the presentation. My colleague Crystal will monitor the chat box and she will answer questions that she has time to answer. And if there are any left over, I'll answer the rest. Or if people think about questions at the very end and you type in a question at the very end of the presentation, I can tackle those as well. Also keep in mind that this is being recorded. That means that there will be a recorded version placed on our website, probably by the end of the week. And you will also get the slide deck as well if you have registered for this presentation. So you will be able to review it again as many times as you need to. One more thing about the chat box, folks, please remember to type your questions and make them visible to everyone. So do not target your question to one staff member. Don't target your question only to Jesus or Crystal or only me. All three of us need to be able to see the question. So just make sure that it's visible to everyone. All right, we always begin our public meetings with a land acknowledgement. The Arts and Humanities Council of Montgomery County acknowledges that we are in Montgomery County, Maryland, the ancestral and unceded territory of the Accohonic, the Assateague, the Piscataway, the Pocomoke, the Shawnee, and Naws Wawash people. We ask you to join us in acknowledging these communities, their elders, both past and present, as well as future generations. And we know that this is only one small step in a series of actions that need to occur in order to amplify equity. So here's what we're covering today. I will briefly talk about the role that the council plays in the community. I will discuss how grant proposals are reviewed and evaluated. I will go over the grant guidelines, but please keep in mind that you need to read the guidelines carefully. I suggest that you read the guidelines more than once. And while it's wonderful that you're making the time to attend this webinar, know that attendance to this webinar does not mean that you can skip the guidelines. So I am going to sound like a broken record. You'll hear me say it more than once. Please, please, please read the guidelines, read them carefully, and reach out to staff if you have any questions, because honestly, what we find is that the applicants normally that are deemed ineligible are normally the applicants that just didn't read the guidelines. The required application materials that I'll briefly discuss in this webinar are also covered in detail in the guidelines. I'll also cover important reminders, grant writing tips, and within the important reminders and grant writing tips section, I normally touch upon timely occurrences, stuff that's going on in our sector that you should consider while approaching your proposals. And as I mentioned earlier, I will answer any questions you may have, or my colleague Crystal will. So here's the mission and vision for the Arts and Humanities Council. I'm not going to read it verbatim, but know that we are delighted to work in a large multicultural county. Montgomery County, Maryland is one of the most culturally diverse counties in the United States, which is really awesome. And it's also large. It's the size of a small state. It's the size of Rhode Island. That means that we have a lot of geographic territory to cover. Montgomery County is diverse in various different ways. It's diverse in terms of race and ethnicity, economics, geography. We have rural communities, suburban communities, urban communities. And so we have a lot of activities going on in terms of the arts and humanities that we are happy to financially support. Equity and inclusion is of prime importance for all of our funding opportunities. Keep in mind that we have a lengthy equity and inclusion statement, as well as an ADA compliance statement within all of our guidelines. So know that for every funding opportunity, you should always consider DEIA, and that's the acronym we use. That means diversity, equity, inclusion, and access. Now, this statement flows over to multiple slides. And again, this is not something that I'm going to read verbatim. You can read it yourself, but know that we are aware of the fact that as a public grant maker, and that means that we exist to use taxpayer funds that have been given to us by local government. We use those funds to redistribute to the local community to support our creative economy. Now, because these are taxpayer funds, that means that the work that we support has to have communal benefit. And as I mentioned earlier, we exist in a beautifully diverse county. So we want you all as applicants to keep that in mind while you're working on your proposals. Always ask yourselves, what are ways that I can enhance DEIA through my offerings to the community, but also internally when you think about staffing structure, recruiting board, recruiting volunteers, consider DEIA, consider communities that are historically underserved. Take a look at the communities that exist in your neighborhood where you are working and ask yourself if your audiences are reflective of your local community. And if they're not, then you need to look into amplifying DEIA within your internal and external operations. And by internal, I mean staff, volunteers, board, external being the community that benefits from your public offerings. And as a funder, we are aware of the fact that there are a number of communities that historically have not had equal access to public funds, which is why we actually have so many different funding opportunities that we offer. They're designed to benefit different kinds of applicants, whether it be different organizations with different budget sizes or individual applicants, such as individual artists and scholars. And I should say, for clarity, the funding opportunities that we have open right now are for organizations and groups. So if you are an individual artist and scholar, or scholar rather, or maybe you're both, if you're an individual applicant and you are seeking funds, those funding opportunities will open in the fall. So keep that in mind, that you should keep an eye out for fall grants if you are an individual. This category is for organizations and groups. ADA compliance is of prime importance, folks. So I'll say it again, this is really important to remember. We are a public funder using taxpayer funds to redistribute to our creative economy. So that means that because the work we support has to have communal benefit, there should be no barriers for people to participate in your work. So that means that if you are seeking a grant for public programming, the public programming has to occur in an accessible space. It has to be accessible. Really important, folks. I will say that I still see plenty of situations, sadly, in the arts and humanities sector where a public program is offered in a space that's not fully acceptable. Please don't be that organization or group. Please keep in mind that our funding can always be used for accessibility costs, and that's for every funding opportunity. It's always an allowable expense. Also, keep in mind that if you are an applicant who has a space where your staff is working, like let's say your admin staff is not telecommuting and they come to an actual office space, that space needs to be accessible as well. So when we talk about, again, accessibility, equity, again, you want to think internally and externally. Make sure that you do not have barriers for your staff, board, or volunteers when it comes to accessibility. If this is a subject that you're struggling with, you're always welcome to contact staff, but do keep in mind that this hyperlink here, right here, click for tips for how to implement accessibility, that will lead you to a rather meaty document that has various different examples for how ADA compliance can be woven into your operations. Okay, so we do have DEIA resources. Please check them out. And if you're still struggling after reviewing these resources, please feel free to contact staff. If you are an applicant who has accessibility needs, please contact staff and we will help you out in terms of making sure that you can navigate the application if you have accessibility needs. So this funding opportunity has multiple purposes. We want to encourage an ongoing relationship between applicants and the local community. We want to help bolster your capacity. That means that we want to promote stability, uh, whether it be staffing stability, financial stability, stability for your organization and group to offer the best programming possible to the local community. And I already mentioned the importance of diversity. That's listed on this slide as well. We want to strengthen the creative offerings that are offered to the community. And I briefly touched on this earlier, help to improve or stabilize management infrastructure. So there's actually so you have some flexibility with how you use this grant, which I'll describe in more detail a little bit later in the presentation. Here's the deadline, folks. It's non-negotiable. Please keep in mind that we cannot accept late applications. So do whatever you need to do to remember this deadline. And please don't begin your application on the day of the deadline. It's highly risky. There's always a couple of applicants who do it. It's not advised. And, the great thing about starting early, you've attended this webinar, know that, if you start early, you can hit the submit button early in SM Apply. And SM Apply, also known as SurveyMonkey Apply, we call it SM Apply for short. That's the portal. It's the application portal where you will submit your application and your work samples and supplementary materials. If you hit the submit button early, that does not stop you from making any changes. So let's say you hit the submit button this Monday, then you go to bed, then on Tuesday you wake up and you realize, you know what, I actually think I want to provide a different answer to that question in the narrative. You can do that. You can jump back into your application and make any tweaks. And, as long as you hit that submit button before the deadline, you can make whatever changes you need to make before the deadline. Please don't hit submit on March 15th at 11:58. That is unbelievably risky. So you don't want to be that applicant who's sitting in front of your computer. You hit submit at 11:58 on March 15th, and you see that spinning circle, which indicates that the portal is still processing your application, and then it doesn't go through because you've run out of time. Make sure you're not that applicant. So what can happen with any online portal, and this is the case for any funder you apply to that uses any of these portals, is that if everyone's trying to submit at the same time on the day of the deadline, it can slow the portal down. Also keep in mind that staff are not working until 11:59 on the day of the deadline. So if you need help and it's past 5:30 on March 15th, you're out of luck. If you have a sudden issue with your computer on March 15th and it's like past 5:30, obviously there's nothing we can do. You want to make sure you're not in a situation where you're facing frustrating tech barriers, or if you're just confused about how to answer a question and you've run out of time and staff can't help you. We want to help you folks. Another reason why you want to plan ahead is because we want to help. We've got 4 funding opportunities open. So that means that this is a really busy time of the year for us. I say that to be said that we always respond to applicant questions, but to be safe, you want to give us 48 hours because we're dealing with a lot of applicants who have questions. So again, if you start early and you give yourself 48 hours to have your question answered, you're good to go. If you have pertinent questions on March 15th, and you heard me say that staff is working till 5:30, and then you send us an email with a whole list of questions at 5:25, don't assume that we'll be able to help. We're working till 5:30, but know that, again, we're dealing with multiple funding opportunities and a lot of questions. So you want to plan as far ahead as possible, which is why we have application templates on the website that you can always look at. Those templates have been on the website since December, intentionally to give people time to plan ahead. So please start as soon as you can, folks, on your proposals. I don't want to belabor the point, but it's very important. Okay, I'm going to take a sip of water. Give me a second. Okay, so this image shows how proposals are evaluated. So I mentioned the application deadline. When that passes, staff will conduct an eligibility check. Now, this check is just to make sure that you as an applicant and the content of your project are eligible per the guidelines. If we have deemed that you as an applicant or your project content is not eligible, we will contact you and explain why. If you do not hear from us for a few weeks, that's good. That means that your application is eligible, and the next communique you'll get from us is an email notification letting you know when the panel will review proposals. We highly encourage all applicants who are eligible to attend the panel meeting. The panel meetings are always held virtually, so that means that you can review them wherever or listen to the panel wherever you are most comfortable. And the panel is a group of consultants, not consultants, sorry. The panel is a group of professionals. Some of them might be consultants, but it's a group of professionals who have been working in the field for quite some time, who have a strong understanding of both the arts and humanities sector. It is a diverse collective of professionals who are diverse in terms of how they self-identify, in terms of race and ethnicity, gender spectrum, sexuality spectrum, age, geography, and the panel will also have a strong understanding of nonprofit management. So they'll have a strong understanding of financial management, marketing, PR, community outreach, programming, the full bit, and they'll have a strong understanding of current trends in the sector. Now, understand that when you attend the panel meeting, this is not your time to defend your proposal. It's your time to simply listen and take whatever notes you need to take so that you understand the panel's discussion of your proposal. And hold on to those notes because we won't be able to help you out immediately after the panel meeting. I know that sometimes applicants are confused by what the panel has said and they want to contact us immediately. We sincerely appreciate your patience because, again, this is a busy time of the year and we can help you before the application deadline. But once the application deadline passes, there is a chunk of time where we cannot help applicants. So when the panel is done with their determination, we send their recommendations to the grants committee. The grants committee is also a diverse collective of professionals who has a very strong understanding of the nonprofit sector, the arts and humanities sector as well. The grants committee will review the panel's recommendations, and then the grants committee chair reports to the board with their recommendations. The board has the final say on who receives a grant and if there are any declines. When the board has made their final determination, we then make public announcements for who receives a grant and if there are any declines. So when the board is done with their final determination, you'll get an email again letting you know whether or not you've received a grant. And when you get that email, that's when staff can set up an appointment and help you out. So if you had questions about the panel's evaluation of your proposal, feel free to contact us to set up a feedback appointment, and we will be happy to discuss the panel's review of your proposal during a feedback appointment after the board has made their final determination. I want to make one more quick clarifying statement about the panel. The panel is there to provide a wonderful educational professional development resource for applicants. Keep in mind that sometimes an applicant will get upset with a panelist's review of their proposal. We know that you all work very hard and this is a labor of love. And sometimes it can be hard to hear uh, a critique of your proposal that you don't believe is in alignment with how you see your work. But I also want you to keep in mind that there are a lot of cooks in the kitchen, and this is intentional to make sure that we have an equitable process. So if you hear one panelist that you disagree with, please keep in mind that one person doesn't have any more power than anyone else who's involved in the evaluation process. So I'll say it again, there's the panel, but there's also the grants committee and the board. So roughly that's, 40 some people. There's a lot of people involved. So I just want to remind you all that one panelist doesn't have more power than other panelists. One panelist doesn't have more power than the grants committee or the board. A collective effectively evaluates your proposal to avoid groupthink and to avoid unconscious bias. So do keep that in mind. If you're one of those applicants that attends the panel meeting, take a deep breath. Know that this is supposed to be helpful feedback and know that there are a lot of cooks in the kitchen evaluating your proposal. All right, the guidelines, which I'll say again, are highly important. Do read them more than once. So for this funding opportunity, you are allowed one grant per fiscal year. The amount can be no less than 1,000 and grants are capped at 10,000. And obviously applicants can also receive a grant that falls somewhere within this spectrum. Please keep in mind that in order to receive a grant for over 5,000, you have to have 501c3 status. So in terms of eligibility, your organization or group has to have an arts or humanities focused mission. You have to have been in operation for at least 12 consecutive months by the application deadline. So keep in mind that everything that's on this slide, these are requirements that have to have been met by the application deadline. So if your organization just opened and you've been open for 4 months, you're going to have to wait a year to apply. You'll have to look at next year. You have to ensure that your organization or group has their primary location or verifiable mailing address in Montgomery County specifically. And I'll say it again, we exist to support the county specifically. We are given funds that are designated for the county. We are not allowed to send funding past the county. So that means that if you're one of those organizations or groups that has technically your primary location or your mailing address is in DC or Virginia or in a different county in Maryland, let's say you're in PG County or Anne Arundel County, you're not eligible, even if you're one of those organization or groups that has done a program or two in the county. You have to have your primary location in the county. Oh, right. You have to operate as a nonprofit, even if you don't have 501c3 status. So keep in mind that we do not fund for profits. And if you are a returning grantee, you're applying again and you've received grants from us in the recent past, make sure that all of your outstanding requirements for any grants received have been met. So in terms of content, you have some leeway for what you decide to apply for funding to support. We can support the creation of new work. This is a multidisciplinary funding opportunity, so it can be work in the arts or humanities, or if you combine the two, that also works. That's totally eligible. You can apply for a public event or program, and you can also apply for capacity building. So in terms of the creation of new work or public programming, again, you have a lot of flexibility for what's allowable within this broad umbrella. It can be performances, exhibitions, festivals, historic presentations. This is not an exhaustive list. These are just some examples. Think outside the box. If you're thinking of new work or programming that doesn't fit on this slide, feel free to contact us and we can talk to you about whether or not your project is eligible. Here's more examples of what we can support under the broad umbrella of the creation of new work and or public programming. We can support public art. We can support arts and humanities educational initiatives, poetry readings, etc. There's a lot that you can do with this grant. In terms of capacity building, and I want you all to honestly think about the fact that you can use this money for capacity building because this was intentionally structured into this funding opportunity. This funding opportunity is designed to benefit organizations with smaller budgets intentionally because, when it comes to equity and inclusion, what we've noticed as a public funder is that historically, grassroots organizations with smaller budgets have not had adequate access to public funds, which is why this funding opportunity exists. And importantly, a lot of organizations with small budgets have not had access to uh, funds that will support capacity building. Normally, what happens is that small organizations, when they are eligible to apply to grants from other grant makers, they're limited to programming specifically. And you can use our grants for programming, but also keep in mind that if you need help bolstering your capacity, if your organization needs money for professional development, strategic planning, technology upgrades, emergency preparedness. We are happy to fund capacity building, and we encourage you to think about it for a variety of reasons that I'll discuss in more detail later on in this presentation. But keep in mind that we know that in order for organizations and groups to serve the community to the fullest, they need to be healthy internally as well. And we want to make sure that we can help you be healthy internally so that you can do your best work to support the community. Also, keep in mind that you have a year to complete your project. Your project can start no earlier than July 1st and should be finished by June 30th. Keep in mind that we cannot pay for pre-award costs. So if you start to incur costs before July 1st, we can't pay for those costs. And post-award costs are not allowable. So if you're still incurring costs past June 30th, we can't pay for those costs. But any costs that you incur from July 1st to June 30th are eligible, with the exception of a few unallowable costs that I'll discuss in a second. The activities, again, this won't surprise you that I'm saying this, have to take place in Montgomery County because, again, our funds are restricted to Montgomery County. It's important, please keep that in mind. Please keep in mind that we cannot support your tour that goes beyond Montgomery County. That's not allowable for this project type, right? So please keep that in mind. Also keep in mind that any programs we support have to be open to the public. It's up to you whether or not there's an admission fee, but we can't fund private events. So there are some grant limitations in terms of what we can't fund. Keep in mind that this is not a general operating support funding opportunity. It is a project grant. So when you are approaching your application and you are discussing what you will use the funding for, please do not list everything that you will do for the full year. You want to think about a clear, concise project that we can support. We can't provide money for indirect costs. Please never include miscellaneous or contingency costs on your budget because we are a public funder. We need to know exactly how the money will be spent. Miscellaneous and contingency, that's too broad of a heading. It doesn't really clearly indicate how you will spend the money, so never include those costs on your project budgets. We can't fund public, private, or charter schools. We can't fund capital improvements, construction, purchase of property. Again, we can't fund exclusive activities. Any activities that we fund for the public have to be open to everyone, not exclusive. We can't pay for fundraising activities, receptions, merchandise, debt, never use our money for regranting, and importantly, never use our money for any form of political advocacy or any activities that take a position regarding any one political party, candidate, or issue. That's important to remember. As you all know, we are in a rather tense political season. Also, keep in mind that we cannot pay for any costs incurred outside of Montgomery County, and this should seem obvious, but I'll say it anyway. We cannot pay for travel outside of the United States. So there are a few more restrictions in terms of the open funding opportunities that we have open right now. If you are applying to this funding opportunity, you cannot apply to programming and capacity building and apply for general operating support grants, and you cannot apply for advancement grants. But keep in mind that I'll say it again, advancement grants are for capacity building. This funding opportunity that we're discussing right now can also fund capacity building. So even though you can't do both programming and capacity building and advancement grants, know that activities that are eligible for the advancement grants are also eligible for programming and capacity building. So keep that in mind. I already mentioned that we can't fund for-profit entities, and we cannot fund grant requests for the same project in more than one grant category. So this is important for those of you to remember who traditionally apply to the Wheaton funding opportunity and programming and capacity building. We have applicants and grantees that are eligible for both funding opportunities. For clarity, the Wheaton funding opportunity opens in the fall. It's not currently open, but do keep in mind that if you get a grant in this grant category and then you decide to apply for Wheaton later, it needs to be for a totally different project. There should be no overlapping costs, no overlapping content. All right, competitive proposals. I mentioned this briefly earlier. We want clear, concise proposals. This is not a general operating support category. So I'm going to give you an example. Let's say a nonprofit art gallery applies, and this is an art gallery that's only been in existence for 3 years. So the executive director of the art gallery decides that they would like a grant for an exhibition that they will present to the community that is for young people on the autism spectrum. And the cool thing about the artwork presented is that the target demographic will be able to interact with the artwork, touch it. It's multisensory because it's designed specifically for young people on the autism spectrum. That sounds cool, right? That's totally eligible. And the applicant also decides that they need money for professional development. They want their board to be more engaged in fundraising. Their board doesn't have a background in fundraising, so they'd like their board to take fundraising courses, and they ask for money for professional development for their board. And they also decide that they need a strategic plan because they would like to grow as an organization, so they need to hire a consultant to work on a strategic plan for them. And they also decide that their website is out of date and they need more current tech, so they decide to also ask for money to buy new tech to bolster and amplify and update their website. So what's the problem with what I've described? All of those activities are eligible technically, but those are actually multiple projects. So you need to pick one of the activities I described, because if you present a proposal that sounds like the situation I just described with the art gallery, the panel will be confused, staff will be confused. It starts to look like general operating support. Keep in mind that grants are capped at 10,000, and you could get less than 10,000. And if you don't have your 501c3 status, you can't get more than 5,000. So when you think about it, like that money can be eaten up rather quickly with any of the scenarios that I just described. So think wisely, folks. Think about the best use of funds and think about a clear, concise application that doesn't include 5 different projects. And I won't belabor the point. Hopefully that's clear. And if it's not, feel free to contact staff with questions. It's always smart to use qualitative and or quantitative data to support your statements. As always, and I mentioned this earlier, but please, please, please always think about DEIA, how you can amplify DEIA in terms of all that you do. And keep in mind that if you are one of those organizations that struggles with DEIA, Just be honest about it, folks. We know that this is a journey that takes time, right? If you're really going to be devoted to fusing equity into all that you do, it can take time to figure out the best way to do that. And we understand that. So if you are one of those organizations that struggles with how to really amplify equity, be honest and tell us and tell the panel via your proposal the ideas that you have and the plans that you'll put into place to amplify equity if you have not been able to do so in the recent past. So I'm going to give you a hypothetical. Let's say that, let's take the art gallery again. So let's say that the art gallery is not going to submit the proposal for the exhibition that I just described, that's focused on serving young people on the autism spectrum. Let's say that they're going to submit a proposal for a different exhibition. They're going to submit a proposal featuring a local artist who was born and raised in Montgomery County, who paints beautiful paintings with flowers in the paintings. So it's nature-focused artwork. And when the applicant is discussing their target demographic, they say, oh, we serve everyone. Everyone's welcome, and nature is for everyone. Okay, so while technically that doesn't sound bad in any way, and it's not technically bad, the questions arise from the panel. How are you actually serving everyone? Do you have proof that you're serving everyone? The panel will be confused. And I know that it may surprise you all to hear me say this, because I think in the past there was this assumption that that's how applicants should fundraise. That's how they should approach their proposal, saying that they serve everyone. But really what the panel wants to see is a clear understanding of your local community and a clear understanding of your target demographic. And saying that you serve everyone without any data to back that up will actually lower your score. And so that's why the first scenario that I mentioned with the exhibition that has a clear target demographic is actually more competitive than saying your exhibition is for everyone, right? So I mentioned a pretty innovative exhibition focused on serving young people on the autism spectrum. And the great thing about that too is, guess what? That's an underserved demographic, right? And it fuses accessibility in a creative way. I'm not saying this is the only type of project you can apply for funding. That's a hypothetical. It's an example. But I bring this up because, you know, if you're one of those organizations that struggles with DEIA and you're not forthright and you try to hide it by saying you serve everyone when you don't serve everyone and your mission is broad, but your audience is homogenous, the panel is usually pretty good at figuring that out, right? And they'll get concerned if they think the applicant is in a state of denial. So it's best to be honest about where you are struggling, and then just let the panel know about your creative problem solving and how you plan to rectify the situation over time. All right. So obviously this is an important question. You'll always want to ask yourself how the project will heighten your organization or group's ability to provide services that directly benefit Montgomery County. That should be obvious. I've stated the same thing repeatedly throughout this presentation. For capacity building projects, ask yourself, how will the project contribute to the fiscal stability and or long-term viability of your organization or group? Think about project impact, right? The scenario that I gave you earlier has a pretty direct impact for a very specific population. Have you communicated with the demographic you'd like to reach? Please try your best to not make assumptions about what you think your audience needs and wants. There are various different ways to communicate with the community. It can be through surveys, focus groups, you know, however you choose to approach it. You want to convince the panel that you are not making assumptions about your target demographic. Always think about marketing and PR. Think about how the local community will know about your phenomenal cultural offerings. And think about partnerships with other organizations and groups. So, the beautiful thing that we've noticed is that ever since the shutdown in 2020, there's actually been a significant increase in the number of partnerships that have occurred among our grantees. And that is a beautiful thing, and it's super smart. It's smart for a variety of reasons, but I'll bring up a couple of obvious reasons for why it's smart to partner with other organizations. If you are trying to reach a new audience, you may find that there's another organization out there that's reaching that audience that you'd like to tap into, and a partnership can expose you to different audiences that you have not traditionally reached. Also, partnerships can help with risk sharing. So, as we know, we've had a bumpy few years in terms of how the pandemic has wreaked havoc on our sector, and the economy has been hard with inflation, and when you're partnering with another organization and you can cost share, that can lessen the feeling that you're engaged in very risky behavior. So I'll give you an example. I've used this example before if you listen to some of my other webinars, but we had a theater company who last year co-produced and co-offered a play to the community, and sadly the whole cast caught COVID and they had to end the run of the play abruptly. And it's always heartbreaking when that happens, but at least it was two organizations sharing the risk. And so when I talked to both of those organizations, obviously they weren't happy about it, but they felt um, like they were in a better place than when this type of activity happened, when they had to totally shut down a play earlier in the pandemic. At least they learned over time about how partnerships can actually help them navigate these challenging financial times. So do keep that in mind. It can be a really innovative approach to how you go about your work. Oh, right. So you want to ask yourself, is the budget clearly aligned with the activities you've described in your narrative? So do carefully make sure that everything that you've described in what will occur in your project, everything that you've described in the answers to the questions that are in the application, that it's clearly reflected in the project budget. So I'll go back to that earlier example of the art gallery that wants money for an exhibition and for professional development for the board and to hire a consultant for a strategic plan and to buy new tech. So that's expensive, but that's also a lot of different activities that have their own various different expenses. And what we've noticed is that when applicants take this approach and they have all these different activities occurring in one proposal, their budget doesn't include all the costs, and then the panel is confused and doesn't understand how they will afford the project. So keep that in mind, that if you're describing activities and it's not reflected in the budget, you need to revise your proposal. Make sure that it's clear that you know how to pay for all of your costs and that you understand all of the costs that will be incurred as you approach your project. Pay equity is important, folks, and it's something that the panel has really centered over the years. I've seen more of a focus on pay equity as each year passes by, and it should be obvious to you all. I mean, obviously, if we're aware of all the strikes that occurred last year. There's been an amplified spotlight on pay equity for important reasons. So I want you to keep in mind that even if you are an organization with a small budget, you can still engage in pay equity. It just means that you are doing fewer activities, and don't assume that that makes you less competitive. It can actually make you more competitive if you are an applicant that understands the importance of right sizing and understands the importance of how your internal structure is in direct alignment with what you can offer to the community. So let me give you another hypothetical. A theater company decides that they want to offer a festival to the community that'll last 2 weeks. It'll be outdoors, occur over the summer. Sounds cool, right? But then the theater company, in terms of their internal structure, has one full-time ED and a part-time coordinator and a small board. And then the panel is reading through the proposal and they see that this organization wants to hire 50 artists. Now, I know this is going to sound like an extreme hypothetical, but I'm going to say it anyway because we've seen stuff like this. So then the panel is confused. They're like, well, we see their budget and how are they going to pay these artists? And the applicant says in their narrative, well, they're getting ample exposure, but then in the project budget, there's no pay listed for the artists they want to work with, or the pay is very low because they're trying to hire so many artists. That is not competitive. I'm just going to be blunt about that. This is a highly problematic scenario. Even if the artists are stellar, even if you have phenomenal bios, artist bios uploaded and the work samples are incredible, if the panel sees that you are trying to hire a whole bunch of artists and you're barely paying them or you're not paying them, they will be concerned and that will lower your score. So the better way to approach this is if the theater company had applied for the presentation of one play. Maybe the play will run a week. It's not a festival. It's one play with a small cast that they can pay equitably. That's more competitive than the huge festival with all the artists, right? So think about what you can do with your budget realistically, all right? Don't assume that you'll be more competitive with a huge project involving a whole bunch of people. That actually can make you less competitive if the panel thinks you don't have the capacity to do the project in an equitable manner. Also keep in mind that the panel will look at salaries for admin staff. So unless you are one of those organizations that is fully volunteer, and I want to be clear that we have had a couple of organizations apply that are fully volunteer. For example, there's a couple of community symphonies that have applied that are fully volunteer. You just need to make it clear to the panel that everyone involved is conscious and fully on board and comfortable with being a volunteer. So if you have, for example, musicians in your community orchestra and they have, bluntly communicated with the leadership of the organization saying they just want to play music for the fun of it, they have other day jobs, they're comfortable with not being paid, that's a different scenario. All right. And I hope the differences are clear. A fully volunteer symphony is not the same as an organization that is claiming to hire artists, claiming to hire staff, and then is basically not trying to pay them. There are significant differences. And if, what I'm saying is unclear to you, please contact us because it's a really important subject. We don't want to see, and the panel does not want to see, staff wearing 10 hats who are, getting paid a horrible wage. And we definitely don't want to see any kind of artist or scholar exploitation. So please keep that in mind. Think about if you can secure other sources of funding. That's always a smart way to go. It's always financially savvy if you have some other cushioning for your project. And it's always smart to share lessons learned from previous work, particularly important for organizations and groups that have been in existence for a long time. But even if your organization is young, the panel is always happy to read about applicants who are involved in evaluation, who are consciously reviewing work that they've done and considering whether or not the work was impactful. So you can share positive lessons about work that was really successful, or maybe you did something last year or the year before that wasn't as successful. It didn't have the anticipated results. And there's nothing wrong with that, right? I mean, as long as you're learning from the situation. So if there's, work that you've done in the recent past and you realize that you needed to do different activities because those activities didn't have the desired results, you can share those stories and it will give the panel confidence that you are committed to impactful work and that you're committed to your own evaluation as well. All right, so and some important realities to consider. As I mentioned earlier, staff, the panel is very aware of the fact that our sector has gone through significant shifts ever since the shutdown in 2020, that we've navigated some challenging times. And a number of organizations and groups have restructured because of what happened in 2020 and the ongoing pandemic and the bumpiness with our economy. Um, regarding inflation. So if you have learned from restructuring or you're in the process of restructuring, keep that in mind, and keep it in mind that if you're going through restructuring, then um, I highly recommend that you think about using the grant for capacity building if you're going through a restructuring process. Think about the great retirement. When the shutdown occurred, there were a lot of people in leadership positions who had decided that it was their time to step down and retire. And so we have a bunch of new leaders working for a lot of the local organizations in our community. And that's really exciting, right? I mean, new leaders can bring fresh ideas, but also keep in mind that sometimes new leaders need professional development, right? So you can definitely use our funds for that. Always think about changing demographics. Montgomery County is becoming more multicultural, not less. So definitely keep that in mind. And we all know that technology changes constantly, right? Make sure that your tech is secure, folks. That's highly important. Make sure that it's not hackable. If you need to work with someone, a consultant, or if you need money to secure your tech, you can use our funding for that. And also keep in mind emergency preparedness, which I'm going to discuss briefly. I know it can be an overwhelming subject, but take a deep breath. It's something that you all should consider, and know that there is help out there when you consider emergency preparedness. So this is just a visual for how disasters can impact organizations and groups that work in our sector. Keep in mind that there are various different types of emergencies that can occur, which is why it's so important that we offer capacity building funds that can help you receive funds so that you're not in a situation where an emergency occurs and it's causes your organization to fall apart or go out of business. And I feel like this is highly important for organizations regardless of budget size. But do keep in mind that what we noticed in Montgomery County specifically, that the pandemic hit smaller performing arts organizations pretty hard. And so while we were relieved to see that most organizations in our community did not go out of business. We did lose about 3 organizations, and those were organizations with smaller budgets and a lack of capacity and a very, very small staff. So again, this is important for every applicant to consider when you think about the longevity of your organization. So we're all aware of climate change, right? I mean, if you're one of those organizations, for example, that offers outdoor programming, do you have a plan for when that unexpected storm occurs that forces your organization to cancel your outdoor programming? If you have objects in storage, let's say you work in the visual arts, or you work in the humanities sector, history, and you have important documents, historical documents in storage, or artworks in storage. Is it in a climate controlled environment? Are these objects safe from floods, for example? So those are just a couple examples, but there are various different ways that climate change can affect our sector. Health, obviously, we think about the pandemic. You want to think about the physical toll it took on people, but also the psychological toll. Um, Technology, I mentioned, I've brought up this example repeatedly in other webinars, but I remember hearing about at the beginning of the year, a small theater company in DC, their tech was hacked, and sadly, the person who hacked their tech stole the majority of their budget. So they were in a financially devastating situation at the beginning of the year, and they've been able to recover, but it's a really heartbreaking story that I hope none of you have to experience. So please think about bolstering your tech if your tech is not secure. So political and cultural, that's pretty nuanced, right? I mean, I don't want to sound like Debbie Downer, but I think we all need to be aware of the fact that sadly, there have been cultural shifts that have amplified communal division. Um, we've seen a lot of fractured communities, um, an increase in hate crime, sadly, and it's all stuff that we need to be mindful of because it can have a direct impact on your organization. I mean, you think about the backlash, for example, that has occurred against Drag Queen Story Hour. You know, you think about the backlash against libraries and groups that are calling for certain books being banned. All this stuff affects our sector, so it's stuff that you want to be mindful of. And unstable organizational capacity. I think I've talked about that enough, but I just want you to be mindful of all these instances so that if something occurs, it doesn't, cause a total domino effect and diminish your organization. Think about if you have a small staff, what happens if your ED all of a sudden gets a severe illness, an unexpected illness, and can't work anymore? Does the organization totally fall apart? Or do you have a plan in place so that your organization can still stay afloat? So think about all this stuff and know that there is actually help out there. So over the years, we've seen an increase in the number of service organizations focused on emergency planning, which is a beautiful thing. And these are individuals who work for these organizations. I've met some of them who are extremely knowledgeable about the arts and humanities sector. Very often, these are individuals who have worked in the arts and humanities sector and are now focused on emergency preparedness. Please check out these organizations and their websites. You'll see webinars on there. You'll see important articles. You'll see some of them have suggestions for consultants. There are a lot of resources that are available that these organizations offer, and they all are aware of each other and they work together, which is a beautiful thing. So keep an eye on these organizations. They do really important work, and the individuals who work for these organizations are warm and want to help you all out. And this is just another visual in terms of how to think about emergency management and all of the various different cycles that occur within this process. And I mentioned this briefly earlier, but it's a visual about, thinking about the various different pertinent changes that have occurred and how it directly impacts the work that you do. So you want to think about all the stuff that I mentioned when you approach the evaluative criteria. This is the roadmap that our panelists use to evaluate all proposals. They are required to always tie their feedback to the 4 evaluative criteria here. So everything that I've brought up should be thought of when you're designing your project, working on your application, and thinking about how you can make sure you're meeting this evaluative criteria, which is also defined in detail in our guidelines. And you'll notice that there's a point system here that's not evenly weighted, and that's intentional, right? It shouldn't surprise you that community impacts is 35 points, given all that I've said about the importance of equity and inclusion, the importance that we are a public funder and our projects have to have communal benefit. So, this shouldn't surprise you. But do know that if you have any questions about how the evaluative criteria is defined in our guidelines, please don't hesitate to contact staff. It's really important that you understand it. Know that you have to receive a score of at least 60 in order to be eligible for a grant. This shouldn't scare you. I will say that most applicants do score above 60, and the fact that you've attended a webinar is a really good sign that most likely, as long as you follow the guidance that we're offering, that you will score above 60. But it is, important to keep in mind. It shouldn't scare you, but keep in mind this rule, because, if you're one of those applicants who starts on the day of the deadline and you're rushing to get your application in on time, usually what happens is that those are the applicants that receive lower scores. So keep that in mind. All right, required application materials. This is pretty straightforward. I'm going to try to go through this as quickly as possible. So again, all this info for required application materials is in the guidelines. So we need you to fill out a full application, answer all the questions. There are support materials that you need to upload, as well as work samples. Oh, right. Actually for groups, sorry, not for organizations. This is for groups. As the slide states, we need a list of your members with affiliation and residency address or work address. Please make sure that you highlight members who work or reside in Montgomery County. We need bios. Bios are highly important, folks. Take your time working on your bios. You want to make sure that it's clear to the panel that you are working with people who have the skills to bring your project to fruition. I find that sometimes applicants just don't really think about the bios and they just quickly upload them. Bios are a wonderful way to really brag about the people that you work with. It can take your proposal to the next level in terms of competitiveness. So let me give you an example. So let's say an organization, let's take the art gallery again. So one of the things that they wanted to apply for in that long laundry list of activities in their proposal is to update their website. So they list that in their narrative that they want a brand new website. Their website is outdated. It's not very accessible to those with ADA needs. And so the panel looks at the bios that the applicant has uploaded, and they don't see anyone listed with tech experience. So that's a problem, right? So they'll be confused. They'll be like, well, who is qualified to do this work? The applicant doesn't have anyone on staff with tech experience, and you want to make sure that you're not that applicant. So make sure that the bios are in direct alignment with the project activities you have described. Upload a strategic plan if you have one, and if you have an organizational chart, that's great. Please upload it. For organizations, we need you to complete a 501c3 status check. We need your IRS letter of determination. We need a list of your board members. Please make sure you highlight members who work or reside in Montgomery County. We need bios, and also we need, if you have it, a strategic plan. If you have it, and if you have an organizational chart, again, that's great. Please upload it. For groups, for financial support materials, we need your fiscal year's end of year revenue and expenses, also known as a profit and loss statement. We need your current operating budget with actuals year to date. And we need a current balance sheet or a balance sheet for the most recently completed fiscal year. I'm going to take a sip of water. Give me one moment. For organizations, we need your 990. If you don't have it by the deadline, please make sure that you upload a letter of extension. And keep in mind that we need your 990 no later than June 1st of 2024 in order for you to get a grant. We also need a profit and loss statement, your current fiscal year's operating budget with actuals, and a current balance sheet or a balance sheet for your most recently completed fiscal year. Programming support materials. So you have a lot of leeway for what you upload for programming support materials. Very often these are marketing materials, or they can be positive testimonials from the community, testimonials from individuals who have had positive experiences with your programming. You'll see a list of examples on this slide. This list is not exhaustive. So if you're confused about what you should upload here, feel free to contact us, but you have a lot of freedom for what you upload here. But here's where you don't have freedom, and that is the number of programming support materials you can upload. You're going to hear me say this more than once because there are always applicants that ignore this rule. No more than 5 hyperlinks, no more than 5 pages. The panel does not have the capacity to review more than what's listed on this slide. All right, so when I say no more than 5 pages, that doesn't mean put 5 hyperlinks on each page. That's 25 hyperlinks. That's way too many. No more than 5 pages, no more than 5 hyperlinks. If you exceed these limits, the panel will not see it. Please don't put staff in the position of having to remove programming support materials, but we will have to do it if you exceed these limits. Work samples, it's the same thing. We have limitations for how many you can upload. No more than 10, no more than 10 files, no more than 10 pages. Non-negotiable, folks. Think about quality and not quantity. So I want to be clear here. An applicant that submits 4 stellar work samples is more competitive than an applicant that submits 10 mediocre work samples. So try your best to, obtain the best of the best of what really shows your organization or group doing the finest work that you've offered to the community. And just because you submit more does not make you more competitive. So choose wisely and take your time choosing your work samples. Please keep in mind that if you're a performing arts or media arts applicant, please upload audio or video. Stills are not applicable for performing and media arts applicants. Stills are fine for visual arts and for the humanities, but it doesn't help the panel out if they simply see stills for performing or media arts. We have limitations in terms of video length, audio length, the length of written work. If you are a humanities applicant and you're uploading written work, please don't make it painful for the panel to read your work, meaning that you don't want to upload a PDF that has teeny tiny font with teeny margins. Don't do that to the panel. So if you're uploading written work, double space with at least 11-point font and at least 1-inch margins so that they can quickly absorb the quality of the written work without, a struggle. Please keep in mind that, with audio and video, no more than 10 minutes combined. If you are one of those applicants who doesn't have editing capabilities, that's okay. So let's say, for example, you have a phenomenal YouTube video of an awesome jazz concert that you provided to the community last year, and that jazz concert is an hour. So if you don't have the capabilities to edit that video, that's okay. You simply give the panel directions for what they should look at. So you would write up directions for the panel, tell the panel to fast forward to a certain time and stop watching at a certain time. And in that way, you're abiding by our length limitations. All right, this is just some technical guidance here. SM Apply links directly to, it supports YouTube and Vimeo links. If you're using another website, that's fine. Just keep in mind that you'll have to put a hyperlink in a PDF and make sure that it's the full hyperlink, not shorthand. Also, please test your hyperlinks. Make sure that the links aren't broken. Make sure that they're not password protected. If you are nervous about this stage of the proposal, if the tech component of work samples freaks you out a bit, start this early and you can ask staff for help. So let's say you're uploading a video directly to SM Apply, or you're putting a hyperlink in a PDF that you're uploading to SM Apply, and you can't tell if the panel will be able to access the link. You can contact staff and say, hey, can you make sure that you can see the video that I've uploaded? And we're happy to do so, as long as you give us time. So please don't email us this request at 5:25 on the day of the deadline. Please give us at least 48 hours, and we're happy to help you out with any tech issues that you may have uploading your work samples. So this is supposed to make you laugh, because I know that filling out proposals for grant funds can be stressful, and who doesn't love Steve Carell? It's supposed to make you laugh, but it's also, again, to emphasize the point that we cannot accept more work samples and supplementary materials beyond what I've just described. We will remove any support materials and work samples that exceed the limitations. So again, if you upload 15 work samples, we will take the first 10 and get rid of the other 5. The panel will not see the additional 5. So it's a waste of your time to exceed these limits. Don't do it. All right, so there are additional resources on our website for you. So there's a project budget webinar. I encourage you to look at it, particularly if you're a new applicant. And even if you're not a new applicant, take a look at it. It can be helpful. We also will have an SM Apply webinar on our website soon. If you're brand new to SM Apply and you want to see how it looks from the project side, there's actually an SM Apply webinar on our website for the advancement funding opportunity. You can take a look at that if you want, but know that we'll have an SM Apply webinar specifically for programming and capacity building soon. And also staff are happy to help if you're having any struggles with how to navigate SM Apply. Keep an eye on our resources page, even when the deadline is passed. Regardless of whether or not you get a grant, it's smart to keep an eye on it. We will update it as soon as we have time. When these funding opportunities close, we'll spend some time updating it. But, do keep an eye on it. It'll be updated throughout the year. And I want to bring up financials for a minute, because what I've found in my tenure at the council is that for this funding opportunity in particular, we tend to get some rather messy financials. And I think some of that has to do with, some of the organizations that apply may be newer organizations, younger organizations that are still understanding financial management. So keep in mind that there are resources out there to help you with your financial education. And I highly recommend the Nonprofit Finance Fund. This is their website, but know that on our resources page, it's also one of the organizations that we list as a helpful resource. So when you go to their homepage, you're going to see this in a menu bar. They have a lot of different subjects that they touch on their website. I want to guide you specifically to financial tutorials. So when you hit the menu bar, you'll see that there's a learn option. Click on that. And then you'll click on fundamentals and webinars, resources for nonprofit leaders, really helpful stuff. So then when you click on nonprofits, and again, this is for groups and organizations with 501c3 status. Regardless of whether you have 501c3 status, I suggest taking a look at this. And you'll see that there's hyperlinks for a variety of subjects here. We've got cash flow, financial management training here, how to craft your organization's financial story. And then, there's just a lot here that you have access to. These are all hyperlinks to various different subjects, and you'll see even more subjects here. An explanation of equitable budgeting for nonprofits, planning tools, cash flow projection templates. They have financial management training on different levels. So that was 101. This is 201 with even more detailed offerings for how to approach financial management. Again, it gets even more detailed here. Issues facing small nonprofits. You might want to take a look at that. Recession tips for nonprofits. Thankfully, we're not in a recession, but with inflation, it never hurts to look at stuff like this. There's so much here that you have access to. And then they have a couple of resources that are specifically for arts and culture. The other pages here are for nonprofits in general, but are still very helpful. So don't assume that just because these are broad-based suggestions for nonprofits that it doesn't apply to you because you work specifically in the arts and humanities sector. This is just helpful guidance for nonprofits in general. So do check them out. They're very helpful. And I'm going to quickly go over some important reminders. So here is the link for SM Apply. This is where you upload everything, all of the support materials, the work samples. This is where the application is located. Everything has to be uploaded to SM Apply. You can't email us parts of the application. It all has to be on SM Apply. Grant awards will be announced in late June, again, after the board has made their final determination. Please keep in mind that we will offer full payment of the award after we receive the following items that are listed on this slide. The grant agreement, that is a document that if you are awarded a grant, you have to sign on SM Apply. You have to fill out a bill.com contact form. Bill.com is the site that we use to transmit funds. We stopped mailing checks a very long time ago, and that is for your benefit. Checks can get lost in the mail. It takes a crazy long time for checks to be mailed and then be received by you. It's not a safe way to approach dispersing funds. Bill.com is a vetted, safe platform that is used by a number of organizations and businesses. We've had no issues with it. We've been using it for years. It's the safest approach, and it's the only way we will get funds to you. Every once in a while, we get a grantee who asks if they can get payment in a different mechanism through a different way, and the answer is no. You're required to utilize Bill.com in order to receive our grant funds. If you have outstanding reports, please get them in. And importantly, we cannot give funding to you until after we get payment from Montgomery County government. So I bring this up because, as you know, sometimes the government moves slowly, and this is something that we don't control. So sometimes a delay can occur when we actually get our appropriation. Sometimes it takes our local government a little longer. It varies from year to year, I'm going to be perfectly honest, and it's not something that staff can predict. And again, we have no control over it. So I say this to be fully transparent so that you can plan accordingly. So if you are one of those applicants who is heavily dependent on our funding in order to start your project, then you probably don't want to start your project on July 1st. So if you can't start your project until you get a grant from us, I would plan on starting your project a little bit later to be safe. Just because you can start your project on July 1st doesn't mean you have to. You have a full year. You can start it later in the summer or in the fall if you wish. Keep in mind that if you decide that you have to start your project on July 1st, then make sure you have some other income that can support you until you get our funding, and you can always use our funding as a reimbursement. Please don't wait until the last minute to start your application. I know I've said this more than once, but it's highly important. It's always smart to read project descriptions of the previous group of grantees who received funding under this funding opportunity. If you go to our website, you'll see that we have PDFs that you can download that have a full list of all of our grantees and descriptions of what they have used their money for. So read through it. It's very helpful in terms of understanding what can be funded with this funding opportunity. And you can do a pretty deep dive. Those documents go pretty far back. Always read the instructions in SM Apply very carefully. And again, refer to the guidelines, read them carefully. Write clearly and concisely. Use plain language that is understandable, as understandable as possible, with a broad demographic. As I mentioned, panelists, grants committee, board, those are all diverse collectives of people who will read your work. So, I would suggest that you avoid niche terminology, academic jargon, use plain, accessible language. Be careful with acronyms. This is a common mistake. So you can use acronyms, just make sure that you spell them out at least once. Very often when people are rushing and they're writing quickly, they forget to spell out acronyms. Don't assume that the panel will know the acronym you're referring to. Importantly, the panel, the grants committee, the board, that none of these people have the time to do additional research beyond what you've submitted. So the panel can only review what you've submitted. They won't have the time to get on a search engine. They won't have the time to go to Google and try to research what you've described in your proposal. They won't have the time for any of that. So make sure that what you present can stand on its own in a clear way. And it's always smart to have someone who's unfamiliar with the work that you do review your proposal to make sure that it's clear to them. So if you have someone who doesn't work for your organization and they're really confused by what you've written, then I would suggest revisiting your proposal just to make sure that it's as approachable by a diverse demographic. Take your time choosing your support materials and your work samples. And if possible, please attend the panel meeting if you're an eligible applicant. So here's the deadline again, folks. A reminder that we can't accept late applications. Start as early as you're able to. Get your questions to us early so that we have time to help you. And I said this earlier, but know that everything has to be on SM Apply. Don't email, fax, or mail sections of your application. Sign up for our newsletter so that you are kept in the loop for all that we do. I mentioned that we'll have more funding opportunities in the fall, but also keep in mind that we have other initiatives that we offer to the community. We have professional development opportunities. We've had networking events where you can meet other people in the sector who do work similar to yours. We manage a gallery that also has exhibitions featuring local artists. So there's a lot that we do. So definitely sign up for our newsletter so that you are aware of all that we offer. And here's my wonderful staff, really friendly, smart people who want to help you out. I know this is going to seem odd, but we want you to include everyone who's on this slide in your email inquiries. And I know a lot of people don't like group emails, and I understand not liking group emails, but the reality is this. My staff is small and we have 4 funding opportunities open. So to ensure that we are able to answer your inquiry in a timely manner, it's best to include all of us so that the person who has time in that moment can respond. So it's really the safest approach to making sure that you get your questions answered in a timely manner. Jesus is brand new to our organization. We're happy that he's with us. He is a wonderful resource for tech questions that you have. But again, make sure that you include everyone who's listed here in your inquiries. And with that, I'm going to answer any questions that Crystal has not had the time to answer. Crystal, are there questions that you need me to tackle?
I do have a question. Let me scroll back to it. Okay, so this is both about eligibility and then, if so, possible competitiveness regarding whether requesting funds to retain an auditing firm to conduct an organization's first audit would be considered an acceptable capacity building activity in the context of this grant.
That's actually a really good question. No, unfortunately, we can't pay for your audit. And I'm actually really glad that that question was asked because that probably should be clarified in more depth in the guidelines. But we, for transparency and equity reasons, should not be involved in anyone's audit. Yeah, every once in a while I'll get an applicant who asks me, can I recommend auditors? And even with that kind of a question, I can't. Like, we really should not be involved in that process at all. So sorry, that's actually one element of capacity building that we cannot pay for. But it's a good question. I'm glad you asked it. Are there other questions, Crystal?
Nope, that's it.
Okay. So thank you, Crystal. I'm going to hang out for a few minutes to see if anyone else has additional questions. I want to be clear getting back to the audit question, though, because that's a really good question. Know that we're happy to pay for other forms of capacity building related to financial management, again, professional development, strategic planning can involve amplifying your financial needs, but yeah, unfortunately, an audit we can't pay for. All right, well, while I'm waiting, I'm going to take another sip of water and just hang out for a few more minutes. Thank you for the thank you messages, folks. It's very sweet of you. I'm glad you made time out of your busy day to attend. All right, folks. Well, thank you so much for attending. As I've said earlier, this is not your only opportunity to ask questions. Feel welcome to do so. If you think about questions later on this week or next, we're happy to help. And with that, we look forward to reading all of your innovative proposals. Thank you so much for your service to the community. Have a lovely evening. Take care. Bye-bye.